I wasn't supposed to be at the corner bookstore that late. It had been one of those days when the apartment felt too still, and scrolling through my phone only made the silence worse. I wandered in like someone killing time, pretending to look for something I needed. She was there, behind the counter, leaning on her hand like she'd been waiting for the clock to move. Ms. Akiyama. I'd seen her before, always with her reading glasses low on her nose, sleeves rolled up in a way that felt more like accident than style. Mid-40s, maybe older, but she carried it like she didn't care who was watching. Back again? She said without looking up. I smiled, though I wasn't sure if she could see it. I think I've read everything else in the city. She made a small sound, half laugh, half sigh, and slid a bookmark into the open novel in front of her. Her eyes finally met mine. A few seconds too long, maybe. I went to the shelves. I wasn't looking for a book, I just needed to stand near her voice a little longer. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. Outside, the rain hit the windows in slow patterns. Coffee's still on, she said. I turned. She was already reaching for the old thermos she kept behind the desk. She poured into a paper cup and pushed it toward me. Not great, but warm. I took it, fingers brushing the rim where her hand had been. Too hot to drink yet, but I held it anyway. Thanks. Don't thank me, she said softly. You're the only reason I make enough for two. That sentence sat between us, heavy but unsaid in all the ways that mattered. I nodded, pretending it was casual. Guess I'm predictable. You always show up when it rains, she said, eyes flicking to the window. Then, almost as if catching herself, she added, Must be a coincidence. I didn't answer. The cup warmed my hands while the silence stretched. She shifted in her chair, adjusting her sweater, and I noticed her nails, short, unpainted, a little uneven. For some reason, I couldn't look away. Do you ever write? She asked suddenly. The question startled me. What makes you think that? You pause too long when you speak. Like you're editing in your head. I laughed under my breath. That obvious? Her smile was small, quick. Then she looked down at her own book again, but her hand stayed curled near the edge of the desk, fingers tapping lightly. I wondered if she was nervous or just restless. I opened the book I'd grabbed without seeing the title. The words blurred. My thoughts kept circling her, how her voice dropped at the end of certain words, how she said my name once last week and I'd replayed it in my head since. The clock on the wall ticked louder as the store emptied. I was the last customer. I stayed, pretending to read, until she stood and began stacking a few books to close up. You don't have to leave yet, she said quietly. It's fine. Something in her tone wasn't casual. I folded the edge of the napkin that had come with the coffee, over and over, until it was nothing but a small crumpled square. My chest felt tight with words I didn't say. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, lips pressing together before setting it face down. Then, without looking at me, she said, Don't tell anyone, but I don't really mind the rain. She looked up then, and the corners of her mouth softened, almost like an invitation. I opened my mouth, but the words stayed caught. That's when my phone lit up. A new message. From her. You can come back after I close if you want. The shop was darker after closing, lit only by the desk lamp she left on. Shadows stretched across the floor, softening the edges of everything. I sat on the counter while she turned the key in the door, her back to me, her sweater loose at the shoulders. You're not tired of books yet? She asked, voice light but low, as if the quietness of the empty store demanded it. Not really. I like the way they smell more than the way they read. She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that disappeared quickly. She poured hot water into a chipped ceramic mug and set it in front of me. Tea. Better than that coffee. The steam rose between us. I pretended to study it instead of her face. For a long while we didn't speak. I thought she'd fill the silence, but she seemed comfortable in it, like it wasn't something to fix. Finally she said, This place was my husband's idea. I looked up. She wasn't looking at me. She was running her finger along the spine of a book on the shelf, distracted. He wanted a bookstore by the time we turned 40. We didn't make it that far. She gave a small smile that didn't touch her eyes. He left the books, though. I didn't know what to say. I pressed my thumb against the side of the mug, too hot, but I didn't move it. Sorry, she murmured, almost like she'd said too much. You don't have to be. Her gaze flicked to me, quick, searching, and then away. You're young. You'll learn not everything stays. I wanted to tell her I already knew that, but the words caught. Instead, I asked, Do you miss him? She tilted her head, considering. Some days. Other days I don't think of him at all. And then I feel worse. Her honesty sat heavy between us. I wondered why she was telling me. Maybe because she thought I wouldn't understand enough to judge her. Or maybe because I did. I sipped the tea. Too bitter, but it grounded me. I used to send texts I never sent, I admitted. Half-written things. To people who probably wouldn't have cared. She turned then, a crease between her brows. You still do that? Not lately. Her lips pressed together, like she wanted to ask who the texts were meant for but didn't. Instead, she wiped at the counter with her sleeve, a pointless gesture. There was a long pause. My chest felt too full. I imagined leaning forward, brushing her hand, saying something reckless. Instead, I set the mug down too carefully. She reached for it at the same time, her fingers grazing mine. Just a second. Just skin against skin. But she froze there, eyes holding mine in the dim light. Careful, she whispered, as if it meant more than the hot tea. I nodded, though either of us moved. The next evening I almost didn't go. I walked past the bookstore twice before giving in, telling myself it was just routine. Nothing more. Inside, she was moving boxes near the counter, hair pulled back, glasses sliding down her nose. She looked up when the door chimed. You again, she said, but softer than before. I shrugged. Force of habit. She pushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear and went back to stacking. You could at least help, if you're going to haunt the place. So I did. The box was heavier than it looked. She steadied it with one hand, fingers brushing mine again, and I felt that same jolt, like something breaking open where it shouldn't. Thanks, she murmured. The silence stretched. We worked side by side, not talking much, the scrape of cardboard and the faint tick of the clock filling the air. My chest felt too tight, like I was waiting for her to say something, or maybe for myself to. But then the bell above the door rang again. Her neighbor, older woman, probably in her 50s, poked her head in. You're still open? Just cleaning up, she answered quickly, moving a step back from me. The distance was immediate, almost rehearsed. The neighbor's eyes flicked between us before settling on me. A pause. A polite smile. Ah. Helping out? Yeah, I said, though my voice cracked a little. After the door closed, she let out a breath she'd been holding. Her shoulders dropped. She turned away, fussing with the books again. I wanted to ask why that mattered. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the counter. She seemed curious. She always is, she said shortly. Then, softer. That's the problem. The room felt colder somehow. I shoved my hands in my pockets. We didn't speak for a while after that. Just the sound of her pen scratching notes on a pad, the tap of her nail against the wood. Every few seconds her eyes flicked toward me, then away, like she was testing a boundary either of us wanted to name. Finally she said, You should probably go. I nodded but didn't move. Her gaze held mine a moment longer than it should have. Something unspoken pressed at the air between us. I could feel the words forming. I don't want to leave. I could see her fighting something similar. Her hand rested on the counter near mine. Close enough. Too close. I leaned forward before I realized I was moving. Her breath caught. Our faces inches apart. And then she pulled back, shaking her head slightly. Don't. The word wasn't sharp. More like a plea. I swallowed, heart pounding. I wasn't, but we both knew I was. The silence after felt louder than anything we'd said. It was late again when we closed the shutters. The air outside smelled of damp pavement. The storm finally passed. She locked the door, and instead of leaving, we just stood there on the curb, either moving. "You walk home this way?" she asked. "Yeah." So we walked together. Our steps fell into rhythm, quiet against the wet ground. She kept her hands in her pockets, shoulders hunched a little, like she was trying to make herself smaller. "You don't talk much," she said after a while. "I do. Just not when it matters." She glanced sideways at me, lips pressed like she was fighting a smile. Then, after a pause, "That's when it matters most." We stopped at the small park near the corner, benches still slick from the rain. She sat without asking, brushing the water off the wood with her sleeve. I stayed standing at first, then gave in and sat beside her. The streetlight above us flickered once. Everything else was still. "I shouldn't be here with you," she said finally. I tried to laugh, but it came out uneven. "Why not?" "You know why." She rubbed her palms together slowly. "People talk. They always talk." I looked at her profile in the half-light, the way her hair clung damp at her temples. "Let them." She shook her head, sharp but quiet. "Easy for you." I wanted to argue, but something stopped me. The truth of her voice. The weight in it. "Do you ever feel—" She started, then broke off. She pressed her lips together, eyes on the ground. "Forget it." "No," I said. "Say it." Her hands stilled. She drew a breath, slow and careful. "Like you're standing too close to something you shouldn't want. But moving away feels worse than staying." The words landed heavy in my chest. My throat went dry. "Yeah," I managed. Silence stretched. She picked at the seam of her sleeve, avoiding my eyes. "I thought it would pass. You coming by, drinking bad coffee, lingering after everyone else left. I thought it was nothing. But it's not." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her palm to her face like she'd said too much. I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her I'd felt it too, that pull, that wrongness that somehow felt right. But my fingers only twitched against the bench. "I keep asking myself what you want from me," she whispered. "And I don't know if I want the answer." Her hand lowered. She looked at me then, fully, eyes raw, searching. The night felt sharp with possibility. My heart hammered. I could feel the question rising in her stare, in mine, in the space that separated us by less than an inch. The question neither of us asked out loud. Not yet. The next night I didn't see her. The bookstore lights were off earlier than usual, shutters drawn, the window dark. I stood across the street longer than I should have, waiting for a sign she was still inside. Nothing. The following evening, same thing. No light, no sound. Just a locked door and my reflection staring back at me. I told myself she must be sick, or tired, or gone somewhere. But the truth scratched at me, she was avoiding me. On the third day, I finally knocked. My hand hovered over the glass before I tapped, too soft at first, then louder. No answer. I slipped a note under the door. Just her name. No explanation. I regretted it the second I let go. The silence after felt like punishment. When she did appear again, it was morning. I'd stopped by for coffee on the way to class, not expecting to see her, but there she was at the register. Hair pinned back neatly, sweater pressed, like nothing had happened. "You're up early," she said, voice even. I tried to read her face. "Thought I'd stop by." She nodded, glanced at the next customer. It was clear, whatever had passed between us at the park, she had folded it away. Hidden. I waited until the line cleared. "I left a note," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked up, then down again. "I know. Nothing more. Just that." Something inside me twisted. I wanted to ask why she hadn't answered, why she looked at me now like I was only another familiar face. Instead, I bought a coffee I didn't want and left. The days after blurred. I stopped going by as often. She stopped lingering in her words. When we did speak, it was safe, almost polite. But then, one evening, I overheard her talking in the aisle. Not to me, into her phone. Yes, I told him. No, he doesn't come around much anymore. It's better this way. He's just a kid. Her voice broke slightly at the last part. I froze, pretending to look at the shelves. When I turned, she was already watching me, phone lowered, eyes wide as if she wasn't sure how much I'd heard. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Walked past me without a word. That night I typed out a message. Was it ever real, or did I imagine it? I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My thumb hovered over send. But I never pressed it. I deleted the words one by one, until the screen was blank again. I set the phone down, the room too quiet, the air too still. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. It happened by accident. Or maybe it didn't. I saw her outside the store, closing early again. She was locking the gate when she noticed me standing there. For a second, I thought she'd pretend not to see. But she didn't. You're late, she said, almost like old times. Or you're early. Her keys jingled in her hand, restless. Then she sighed and nodded toward the street. Walk me home? We didn't talk much along the way. The air smelled of bread from the corner bakery, buses rumbling past every few minutes. She carried a canvas bag, shifting it from one hand to the other, like the weight bothered her more than it should. At her building, she hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she pushed the door open and said, "Come in. Just for tea." The apartment was small, books stacked on the floor, dishes drying by the sink. She moved around quietly, filling the kettle, not looking at me. I sat at the table, watching the steam fog the window. Finally, she set 2 mugs down. Sat across from me. "I shouldn't have disappeared," she said, eyes fixed on her tea. I swallowed. "But you did." Her lips pressed tight. She nodded once, like she couldn't argue. "I thought if I pulled back, it would fade. The way it's supposed to." "Did it?" Her fingers tightened on the handle of her mug. "No." The word was soft, but it landed hard. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Then why? Because you're 22. She cut in, finally meeting my eyes. "And I'm 46. Because people would look at me and see wrongness. Because I don't trust myself not to want more than I should." Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't look away. I felt the ache in my chest, the part of me that wanted to argue, to tell her it didn't matter. But the truth sat there too, the age, the risk, the quiet imbalance we couldn't ignore. "I keep thinking about that night in the park," I admitted. "How close we were. How close we still are." Her hand stilled against the mug. Silence stretched between us, long and heavy. Then, slowly, she reached across the table. Not far. Just enough for her fingers to brush mine. "I don't know if I can give you what you think you want," she said. I turned my hand over, let her touch rest there. "I'm not asking for forever. Just for right now." Her eyes softened, the fight in them dimming. She exhaled, shaky, almost like relief. We sat like that, hands touching, words finally spoken, the kettle still whistling faintly on the stove. She gave the smallest smile, tired but real. "Okay. Nothing more. Just that." And it was enough. It didn't change overnight. Nothing dramatic. No sudden confessions, no rushing into something we couldn't carry. Just smaller shifts, the kind that only mattered if you noticed. I kept going to the bookstore. Not every day, but enough. Sometimes in the morning before class, sometimes late after work. She didn't avoid me anymore. She'd leave a mug waiting on the counter, black coffee for me, tea for her. We didn't talk about what we were. We didn't need to. The silence had softened. It wasn't something to fear anymore. One evening, weeks later, we ended up at the same bench in the park. The one still slick from the rain that first night. This time it was dry, the air clear, the streetlight steady. She sat with her arms folded, watching the kids on bicycles circle past. I thought you'd get bored, she said quietly. Of what? Of me. Of this. I smiled small. If I were bored, I wouldn't still be here. She didn't answer. But her hand found mine, like it had before. No hesitation this time. Just the weight of it, familiar now. Time passed. I learned her routines, how she always closed shop at 8:47 p.m. exactly, how she hummed faintly when she sorted books by author, how she took her tea too hot and burned her tongue without ever complaining. She learned mine. The way I folded napkins into tiny squares. The way I lingered too long in the doorway, never ready to leave. There were still days she pulled back, worried eyes scanning the world outside before softening again when she looked at me. But little by little, she stopped fighting it. We weren't loud about it. We didn't have to be. It was in the ordinary things, the empty chair I always filled, the second cup she always poured, the quiet walk home we both pretended wasn't planned. I think about that first night sometimes. How she said, "Don't tell anyone." I never did. But it wasn't a secret anymore. Not in the way it once was. One night, sitting together on that same bench, she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. No words. No explanations. Just the stillness of being seen, without needing to be asked. I let the moment settle in, careful not to move too fast, careful not to break it. And for the first time, I didn't feel paused anymore. I felt finished. Like the sentence had finally found its ending.